All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Hawaiʻi Retirement Show. Today's guest is Dana Anspach. Dana is a certified financial planner, founder and CEO of Sensible Money, author of several books, including Control Your Retirement Destiny, Social Security Sense, and her latest book, which we're here to talk about, is Living Off Your Acorns, Your Guide to the Four Phases of Retirement. So Dana, thanks so much for joining us and taking the time.
Jason, it's great to be here. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Okay, so I got the book. It's a great read. I love it. I love it. It came out spring of this year, right? So
Yeah, May, I
May.
think May 12th was the release date.
Okay, I love it. And for the listeners, if you're approaching retirement, I'm not just saying this because Dana is with us. It is such a great book because I love that there's checklists where you can kind of be process driven about how you approach things. There's stories and examples where it kind of walks you through different scenarios of what could happen with different people. Dana, you put your own, personal perspective and stories in there, and so it's just a great book for those looking to kind of get a clearer picture of what the phases of retirement might look like. So, with that, I guess Dana, what inspired you to write it, and was that your goal to kind of set out to create this sort of a roadmap, so to speak, and tell some stories about the different phases?
Yeah, my first book, Control Your Retirement Destiny. What inspired me to write that was I felt like the industry was doing retirement planning wrong. And I went to rewrite it several times, and it's just like the tax laws kept changing, and
Yeah.
and so I thought, you know what? The details are always going to change. Let me step back and think about what it's like now that I've worked with clients, in some cases for 25 years. I've watched the full cycle of retirement. And what does that look like? How would I frame this differently if I were starting over and writing about what retirement looks like? And that's really where it came from, is seeing these phases in action in working with real households that become like family to us, watching them prepare for retirement, then watching the nervousness as they actually retire and start to live off their acorns. And then they settle in and get a little more comfortable. And then there's this phase of often gifting more, or really realizing, whoa, I'm not going to run out of money.
Yeah.
This is going to work. And then that slow go phase invariably occurs where people are not traveling as much. They will tell us they don't need an increase in their retirement paycheck because they're not even spending what we're sending already. And then, of course, that last few years of life, which can be peaceful for some and challenging for others, and realizing how we don't talk about that no-go phase enough and prepare for it. So it was really seeing that in its full cycle that inspired me to write it. And then, of course, me approaching, I was 53 when I first really started thinking about the book, now 55. So really starting through that pre-go phase myself, it becomes more real.
Right, right. Yeah, and I love thinking about, not even just retirement, but life in general. There's seasons to it, right? There's different chapters. There's different, I had a career here for so long, that chapter closed. I had these personal relationships, that chapter closed. And so it's just a great way to look at life, let alone retirement. And I think we'll get to it. Even within these different phases, a lot of people might find, different seasons or different chapters within each phase, right? And it's an interesting way to always think we're always kind of changing. There's always the next chapter coming, right?
There always is. And I think for a long time we've thought of, work and then retirement as
Yeah.
if it was this one homogenous phase. And, it's not, it's going to go through this cycle. And even within that cycle, as you said, you can reinvent yourself and find new purpose and new hobbies and, new seasons within it. And there's different planning aspects. And I group it. So it's kind of like 4 mini books where there's risks we face, there's tax and planning opportunities, there's the emotional side that we have to go through, there's how spending changes. So those evolve differently depending on which phase of retirement you're in. And we have to, even as planners, think about how we adjust the advice we're giving, and think about it differently. People's needs are different when they're in different
Yeah.
phases.
Yeah, sure. Being adaptable, being flexible, and I mean, we're not pinning ourselves into any corners of this is how it has to be. And yeah, I love it. So I guess at a high level, I always think of, and I'm positive you've heard of this as well. You can break like your whole financial life into two big categories, your accumulation phase and your decumulation retirement phase. And that's just saying your accumulation phase is when you're saving up all that money. And at some point, you make this switch to decumulation and retirement, and that's hard for a lot of people, and we'll get into it, is switching from we're no longer optimizing for growth. We're going to start taking distributions from these portfolios that we've only seen kind of go up, other than market volatility and the little dips. But yeah, why does I guess we'll just start with that. The transition to spending or decumulation. I'm sure you've heard of it. It can be a difficult transition for some, right? To have the income stop and start taking
Yeah.
distributions.
Yeah, it's difficult for most. So I had a friend call me last week and he sent me a text. We hadn't talked in a while, and he said, I'm financially secure. I don't understand. I'm actually getting ready to retire. Why do I feel so sick to my stomach and nervous?" And I said, "Let's jump on the phone." And we just chatted for about 15 minutes about how normal that was. Have you've done all the planning, your financials are sound, like, well, this is normal to feel this way. It is a huge life shift, not only from what you do with your time, but if you have been a financially driven saver, somebody who we, feel good seeing those balances go up. It feels good to watch our net worth go up. That fear of suddenly seeing it flatline or start to go the other direction, and oh my gosh, is this really going to work? It's completely normal.
Yeah.
And I would say, even households where we've run the numbers over and over and over and stress tested it every way possible, they are still nervous. And so
Right, right.
it's just give yourself permission once my friend told me, wow, like just hearing that I'm okay, this is normal made me feel better. I thought something
Right.
was wrong with me, that maybe there was some risk I hadn't thought of, or, this kind of icky feeling, he couldn't place it, but hearing that it was normal, made him feel better. So I think that's the first thing to understand. The second, the math changes, as you said, when you are accumulating, for the most part, you're going to have positive returns and you're not having to worry about the timing of when you take money out. But volatility can have a negative impact, particularly around what we call that retirement risk zone or retirement red zone, the 5 years prior to and first 5 years of retirement. And understanding that downward volatility can have such a bigger impact on you should really change the way you think about how you invest and manage money. Rather than going for the biggest growth or highest rate of return, you need to think more about what's going to protect me in a worst case scenario, what's still going to what's still going to enable me to have the retirement cash flow that I want. And that's a different mindset. I mean, you are truly solving for a different math problem at that point. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the emotional side, what are you going to do with your time? It's going to be a big
Right.
adjustment. It's considered a big life stressor, right up there with marriage, divorce, having a baby, having a
Mhm.
death in the family, starting a new job. These are all times of big change. And so you have to give yourself permission to adjust to that, and time to regroup, really. And I believe that you should really start thinking through all of that in the pre-go phase. If you want a successful transition, and you wait to think through some of this till you're there, it feels so much sharper. Versus what I'm doing is, really starting to be thoughtful about this. I used to be terrified of retirement, like terrified. And now all of a sudden in the last 2 years, that has shifted to where it's something I can see that I can plan for, and I can figure out a way to enjoy that transition. So for me personally, thinking through all of this has been a huge mental shift. Something that was dark and gloomy and terrifying has suddenly become a light bulb out there that, wow, like I'm going to do this one day and I'm actually going to enjoy it.
Yeah, no, that's great. And then so there is like you touched on the financial side, and then we touched on the emotional side. And what I loved, as you mentioned in the book, is discovering your new identity in retirement. And I think that idea, a lot of people, you might have won the financial game and you have overabundance. And then you get there and you're like, well, who am I? What am I doing? because you had this whole career, like for instance yourself, right? I mean, you probably see yourself as, well, I'm a financial planner, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm an author, and now all that goes away. And then who are you, right? And then you got to rediscover, well, what are my hobbies? What are my interests? So that discovering your identity, I thought was great, great point in the book.
Yeah, and I, really started to dive into that from the work of Fritz Gilbert of the author of the Retirement Manifesto blog.
Mm.
And so reading his work, and I blog for him now and I consider him a personal friend. It really helped me think through this a little more clearly and realize for myself how, even though I do retirement planning for a living, when I thought of my own retirement, it literally was like this locked box. Like, nope, nope, can't think about that. Don't want to go there. What will I do? It just felt not good for me because I'm very driven. I like accomplishing things and checking
Hmm.
things off my task list and
Sure.
being able to feel the impact I have with clients and with staff. There's just so much. I'm very lucky that I love what I do. But thinking through it the last 2 years, it started as I share the story in my book in Beaver Creek, Colorado. I'd had a really intense period of work. We took a little over 2 weeks up there. Normally a few days off on vacation. I'm getting antsy. I'm ready to get back to work. And I didn't feel that way for 2 entire weeks. And it was the first time where I was like, oh, this is what a joyful retirement could be like. You're hiking and playing pickleball and outdoors, and everything was at a reasonable pace, not jammed between Zoom calls and emails and,
Mm.
all of the things that we
Sure.
do. And so I described that as the dimmer switch came on in my, future retirement plans. And now, 2 years later, I would say that dimmer switch has gone up. It's a fully lit room now. My husband and I have, because of the book, and this was a surprise to me, some of the conversations that's initiated from him reading it and thinking through it in these long-term phases has caused us to talk about it more, to experiment, and to really kind of build our 55 to 60 year plan, the next 5 years, and then what it'll look like from 60 to 65, and then what it'll look like from 65 to 70. And we would have never had those conversations, before. We weren't thinking about that as clearly. So now we're excited. We're still excited about work. It's a really interesting place to be, and also excited about this. Wow, I can't believe I am actually excited about retirement one day.
Yeah. So what advice would you give somebody who's kind of struggling? Let's say, you've had the family, they got the kids, they've been working, and they're like, well, I haven't, I've my life is revolved around, work and family. What advice would you give them for finding that identity in retirement? Is it just a matter of go out there and try a bunch of things and see what sticks? Is it try to revisit some things you used to enjoy when you were younger? Well, what advice would you give?
I think those are both great suggestions. There's a great YouTube video by, I believe it's Dr. Riley Moynes, who it's called The Four Phases of Retirement. And he's talking about a little sub-cycle of four phases within the four phases that I'm describing. So he's really talking about how you can get to retirement, and the stats are staggering. It's like 85% of people feel a sense of loss and disorientation. A large percentage of people go through depression right after retirement. So they may have a few weeks, phase one of vacation, and
Right.
like, this is great. I don't have to do anything. I have another a good friend of my husband's who was just saying this. He said he tried retirement about 10 years ago, and after 4 weeks, he was like, this is not for me. That was a
Yeah.
very short phase for him. And he ended up starting another business, but he does it differently now. He builds in a lot of travel and time off with his business, no employees. So he's chosen a way to kind of build in a much more reasonable work-life balance in this second career for him. So I think it's different for all of us, right? You mentioned experimentation, trial and error. If you have the opportunity to do that before retirement, fantastic. I'm lucky enough, we're able to schedule some remote work weeks a little more often, and that's our first 5 year phase of being more intentional about once a quarter spending a week somewhere else and doing some work while we're there, but a little bit more reasonable pace, getting used to a different pace during that time. So if you have the opportunity to do that, great. Some people don't. Their career is very demanding. one day there's work and the next day there's not. And that can be a more challenging shift where you do need to do a lot of experimentation early on. Revisiting childhood hobbies and passions, as you said, can be great. Really, it's trying a lot of things. I know when I moved across country, it took a while to find new social connections, and there were some groups I would go to where I was like, and not quite for me. And then all of a sudden, you meet people that you really click with. It's really the same. Give yourself permission to go out and try things. Certainly things that involve social connections. If you're an introvert like me, I know, I can enjoy hiking by myself, doing all kinds of things, but I've taken up pickleball now, and I do love the social interaction that comes with it. So making an effort to make sure you're involving things with other people. Try something, don't like it, try something else. Whether it's, I have a client that plays bridge. I know, Mahjong is huge right now. Other people are more active, hiking, aerobics classes, group fitness, pickleball, golf, fishing, camping. I mean, there's a bajillion things you could go out and woodworking and say, oh, I want to join a group. I'm going to learn more about this. This is something I've always had an interest in, or something brand new, like that you just see it and you go, oh, that might be kind of cool.
Right. Yeah, and I love the idea of you mentioned like the dimmer switch. I think you're probably better off on average if you can kind of work your way into it rather than figuring it out on an abrupt change, right? It just makes sense, right? It's probably better if you have that flexibility and you can start to kind of taper some of the work stress, some of the work identity off and transition. That's probably the best way for most people.
Yeah, I think it is. And, it's just realistically not everyone will have that
Sure.
opportunity, but even in your mindset, right? If you're thinking about it and saying, wow, maybe you have extra vacation, you've been saving up. Well, take a full 2 weeks or 3 weeks, or, do a little mini trial.
Hmm.
See what that looks like. Think about where you might want to live if it's somewhere different. If you do have family, I know one of the things many retirees will say is, yes, family is still a big part, particularly if they have grandkids. But sometimes family gets scattered across the country and they discover that they aren't seeing family as frequently as they may have thought. And so if that turns out to be the case, what are the other things that you're going to find that are going to give you purpose and passion? For some, it's volunteering. For others, it's consulting, blogging,
Hmm.
physical people get into physical fitness. I've seen many retirees, suddenly start going to the gym. Maybe that wasn't their thing. And all of a
Right.
sudden, as another retired friend said, he said, I'm now training for my 80s. Uh,
Right.
and so I loved that too. I was like, yes, in our late 50s, that is what we're doing. I would still want to be able to go up and down stairs when I'm 80. I still want to be able to carry in the groceries.
Hmm.
I'd love to still play pickleball. I know
Right.
a guy out there at 95 playing pickleball. That would be fantastic.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's great. Getting routines, yeah, getting out there. I love it. Okay, so let's jump into let's go through the phases if you're up for that.
Yeah,
And we'll start with the pre-go. I'll just read a couple lines from the book if that's okay about the pre-go.
sure.
So it says, where does the pre-go phase begin? For most in our 50s, for some not until their 60s or even 70s. It starts when you seriously begin contemplating retirement. While certainly while I certainly wish everyone would begin their contemplation a decade out, for some it happens rather suddenly. One day they wake up and they realize they're ready for retirement. So this pre-go phase is kind of what we were just talking about is if you can, you start contemplating it a decade out. Sometimes we don't have that luxury. But what else can you tell us about the pre-go? Because, sorry, one other thing is a lot of people might be familiar with the go-go, slow-go, and no-go, and they've probably heard this. But the unique thing about your perspective is this pre-go phase, and I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think of the pre-go as where we set the foundation for what comes next. Those 10 years before retirement are certainly important from a financial standpoint when we look at sequence risk or, as I mentioned, the retirement risk zone where returns, particularly downside returns, can have a bigger impact on our outcomes. So there's financial shifts that need to happen during that time, but also the emotional shifts and The realization that we may plan to work to a certain age, but statistics routinely show that many people end up retiring a few years earlier than planned. And sometimes not by choice. It may be layoffs, it may be a health issue with a spouse or your own health issue. And so it can be really smart to plan ahead and say, I want to work till 65, or if you're like me and always thought you would work till 70, but maybe I ought to run my financial plan as if I'm done, 5 years earlier than I thought, just so that I'm prepared if life throws me a curveball or something happens. What are the adjustments that I might make? And you may never need those adjustments, but having thought through them, I think makes those situations more palatable. Research does show when retirement isn't our choice, it can be a rougher adjustment. It can be harder emotionally to adjust. You kind of have that feeling of resentment a little bit of like, oh, they took this choice away from me. And so there's some processing that needs to happen to work through that. And so, yes, planning ahead pre-go from the financial standpoint is when you're running all your numbers, building, I call it a cash flow plan, a very detailed projection of the timing of when different income sources will start, like Social Security and pensions, what amount of withdrawals you'll take from which accounts, and then lining that up with the outgoing expenses and accounting for. People forget about expenses like major home repairs. Maybe you have a roof that's 25 years old. We want to budget that in. You're probably still going to buy future autos in retirement, although with, autonomous driving, who knows?
Yeah,
Maybe
right.
we won't need cars anymore.
True.
But there's things to plan in on the spending side. Spending doesn't typically happen in a linear fashion. So if you've been planning on something like the 4% rule where you're withdrawing, an amount increased by inflation each year, all the research and real life shows spending volatility is real. People might spend 20% more or less from year to year in retirement. And so you have to have a plan that can adjust and be flexible to account for all of that. And you're going to feel so much better if you lay all of that out ahead of time. You can settle in, you can relax a little bit. Just seeing the numbers on paper has, in my opinion, sometimes even a magical effect of going, oh my gosh, this really works.
Sure. Yeah, and you mentioned the 4% rule, and I think there's a lot of limitations with that. It's not something that I, advocate for implementing on its own, but it does provide kind of a good, easy to understand estimate of what, your nest egg might look like in retirement. So I think it has a lot of purpose there. And then the other thing is, unfortunately, there's some of us out there that love our work and love what we do, and then there's others that they're gripping that brown paper bag to work every day, and they can't wait till it ends. And what I would say with the pre-go is, you got to be careful too when you if you start it too early because life changes, and if you start trying to think what life is going to be like in 15 years, odds are a lot's going to change, right? I mean, we know that, like, just things change, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think 15 years would be quite a bit out. And
Yeah,
so I've developed this philosophy now I call following my energy during, what I think of as this pre-go phase for me, the last 10 years of really full-time work. And so, what do I have energy around? And I do have a lot of energy around work, but I'm also beginning to build that energy around retirement simultaneously so that that path can be smoother and not as abrupt.
sure, sure. Okay, so let's jump into the go-go. So, from the book here, the go-go years represent early retirement, the phase often filled with travel, new hobbies, and long postponed projects. For some, this phase still includes work, but at a slower, more flexible pace. For many, though, one day there is work, and the next day there is not. So the go-go phase. And as we get into this, like you said, I think it's important to point out that spending isn't linear, and the go-go phase is where we see a lot of spending around enjoying life, kind of entering retirement, right?
Yeah, not only travel, but spending on things that matter. It might be your children. It might be a trip you've always wanted to do. It might be a project of, a backyard deck, a dream
Mhm.
backyard you've always had, or a woodworking shop, or having a boat. So there can be different things that the money gets spent on, but when we talk about spending, it's not frivolous, but it's really understanding the research shows several things. One, we worry about retirement far more up until retirement and usually the first 1 or 2 years of retirement. And after that, it kind of,
Mm.
the financial side kind of becomes, of status quo, like this is going to work. I don't worry about this so much. Um, and then two, when you look at how spending evolves throughout retirement, there are phases where we spend the most during those go-go years, and it naturally slows down even when we factor in inflation. And so, even those who have the means to spend more, JP Morgan has a great annual retirement set of slides they put out where they look at spending patterns of all of their accounts. And even those who have the means to spend more during those slow go and no go years are spending less. And spending often shifts to things like gifting and charitable activities. And so that means there's room. If we even expected our expenses to go up at 3% every year throughout retirement, and that's not going to be the reality, there's room to take some of that spending on the tail end and shift it
Mm.
forward into those go-go years and do some of those things. Now you need to have some kind of methodology you're using
Yes.
to test that, not just, okay, I can just do
Yeah.
this, but some form of a stress test. We use something we call a fundedness test. I think of it as a lifetime 4% rule. So maybe I can take out 8% this year,
Mm.
but that'll work just fine. It wouldn't work okay if I did it every year,
Right.
but it
Right.
might be just fine to stress test some extra spending in there. And so once you have your methodology in place, you can stress test that and every year say, okay, well, what is the amount that I could comfortably spend this year without risking anything in the future, without risking my plans? And that is what gives you that room to do a little bit more in the go-go years and give yourself permission to enjoy what you've worked so hard saving.
Yeah, and I think, the struggle with retirement planning for, professionals or do-it-yourselfers or anybody out there is we're always dealing with these trade-offs and unknown variables. How long somebody's go-go period might be. I mean, they might have a 20-year go-go, or somebody else has a 5-year. Somebody incurs health issues. Somebody else, there's family concerns. I have to take care of somebody, or somebody has to take care of me. And the problem is we're always balancing these trade-offs of okay, I need to enjoy it now, but I don't want to run out. And what is my health gonna do? Am I gonna, and that's why the long-term care discussion is always really difficult because it really is a shot in the dark. I mean, there's some things you can do, some educational, but in the end, you kind of just play the odds. You do the best you can, and it's one other thing I would say is, it doesn't have to make sense to anybody else, whatever provides you peace of mind, right? So some people might say, I hear you, Dana. I understand the go-go, but I will be happier in my life if I do not front load, even though they understand, right? And
Yep.
so it's whatever makes you feel right,
Yeah.
right?
There's that piece of sleep at night factor, right?
Yeah.
Of yes, and ultimately you do want to sleep well at night. And at the same time, research shows that many people have more wealth when they pass than they had at the beginning of retirement. And so where is that balance? And that's why I like having a methodology.
Hmm.
You're working with a planner, they're retesting it every year, not a one-time plan, but every
Hmm.
single year, so that you can make those adjustments as you go along and be able to do things without that risk. You do want to make sure that you're not going to put your later years at risk, absolutely.
Sure.
And ultimately, yeah, some people are just, very comfortable and they still want to see that number go up, and that's what makes them happy.
Sure. And we kind of touched on this earlier, but you mentioned it in the book, and I loved it too. It's how important those first 2 or 3 years in that go-go phase are, as far as you're building kind of structure and routines and whatnot, and it really kind of it sets the tone, right, for the rest of the retirement.
Yeah, if you just start to sleep in every day and have no structure to your day, that's often what can feel very disorienting versus if you're building in, your gym days or fitness class you're going to attend or a cooking class or, you're starting to build things into a new routine. And I think the research shows that can be, very important for people to have some structure to their days so that it's not just feeling like, ugh, extended vacation feels great for a little while. And then for most people, it begins to feel disorienting. So, yes, getting that structure in place is important.
Yeah, and I'm a big sports fan, so I always think of sports, right? And when you start a game, however the game starts, it kind of sets the tone for how the rest of the game is going to go, and it has a parallel to retirement there.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move over to the slogo now. So now we're in the slogo. So from the book, financial worries often fade. The impulse to help children or grandchildren rises. Travel tends to slow down. Health concerns may become more prevalent. This is the phase where consistency becomes a source of comfort. Joy may be found in simple things such as morning in your own kitchen, a neighborhood walk, or a familiar view. And I love reading that last sentence because I try to live that now. Like enjoy the the simple things. But the slow go years, yeah, I guess you could break it down for us. I love that, your impulse is to help children and grandchildren because in your early years you're kind of focused on your retirement. Not that, I mean, obviously we all love our children and grandchildren. We're not thinking about them, but you're thinking more about selfishly. I want to enjoy my retirement. I'm retired, right? So now your kind of perspective shifts a little.
Yeah, and during that phase, we've often had people who want to take the whole family to Disney or
Mm,
realize that, if their children or grandchildren are still building their careers, maybe they could pay for tickets to fly everyone in or meet for a holiday so they can start to help support some of those family gatherings. I've seen Alaska cruises.
sure.
For some, it's camping, but different things to bring the family together that they want to invest in. For others, it can be, bigger things like, wow, housing is unaffordable for many of the younger generations. Can I give them, a significant sum to put down on a house? And so we'll see clients often reaching that slow go phase around the mid 70s is when it begins for most. I think of it as around now the required minimum distribution age. And they may ask, wow, I realize now I'm never going to run out of money. I'm okay myself. I didn't get the Great Depression when I retired. So, what can we do? Could we gift our children this amount to put down on a house? And we'll start running some of those scenarios. Um, Sometimes it's, a new place to live. We don't see that as often in slow go. Usually I see that in go go, the vacation home or the dream, summer location that somebody's always wanted. So it may be going the opposite way in slow go. We want to consolidate. We don't want to maintain two properties anymore, or we're at least beginning to think about that point where we may not want to do this anymore. And it usually happens naturally, not as and we think of it as health impacting us, but in some cases, it's health is fine and
Mm.
people are still active. They just, are happier traveling less. They've gone where they wanted to go. They want less trips. They want a little bit more routine. And that true enjoyment of home seems to take precedence in that phase.
Yeah, and I would love to see, I don't know how they would do a study on this or to find the correlation, but like you mentioned RMD. So once RMD start kind of following the same train of thought, I would think you probably would see people become more charitably inclined. They start thinking of and they start realizing, well, I do have a lot. So where do I want to, okay, I'm going to help my children with this and I'm going to give to this charity. And then also at the same time, hopefully they've planned for their aging and long-term care expenses, but that picture starts to become more clear where they like, okay, I can see maybe the writings on the wall of what I might need or how I want that next phase to look like with the aging expenses and long-term care.
Yeah, absolutely. And slow go is the time to think through all of that. One of the things I learned from my friend Denise Kay, she runs a service that helps place people or find assisted living or long-term care services. And it's just the thought that we should put into those last 5 to 10 years of life that we usually don't.
Mm,
And my conversations with her have really shifted my thinking on this and that, and my conversations with clients in that, wow, in their mid 70s, we should start thinking about, are all the proper people, in place to take over if you're unable to make decisions for yourself? Have you laid out your wishes? I just had a friend who said, she has Alzheimer's in her family. And so she told her husband, look, if that happens to me, I want you to put me in a home. Don't try to take care of me yourself. Like, I want you to still, go out and enjoy life. And these aren't easy conversations to have.
right.
Have we told our children our wishes? Do they, would we want to live in their home?
Mm,
Or, I have another client who's like, my kids know when that time comes, you put me in a home and we want you out, enjoying your life.
right,
And
right.
so they've been very vocal about that. But those are conversations, as challenging as they may be, it's important to talk about them if you're married with your spouse or, with your children, and start to lay out what would you want that to look like. For me, years ago, I visited this client in the, cruise ship on wheels. It was one of those, independent living places, and they had the restaurants and the activities, and I just loved it. And I thought, this is for me one day. And so
Yeah.
I already know, and maybe I'll change my mind, as I get into my own slow go years, but I already had, because of that experience, seeing my path, thinking, one day I could see myself in a place like this. Other people might think, no way, I want to age in my own home and have the funds to have someone come in and care for me. I don't want to go anywhere.
Hmm.
We're all different, and it's really hit me the importance of thinking through that phase.
Yeah, and I love what you said. So the slow-go years, the slow-go is kind of if you haven't had those hard conversations, and it's tough to talk about death and maybe you're distributing assets amongst, children and all that stuff. But what you don't want to do is wait till the no-go years when you're kind of in a worse state. Like the earlier you can have those tough conversations, obviously you don't have it we talked about planning way too early, right? But if you can have these, the slow-go is kind of that sweet spot of like, okay, you should have it now because it just gets harder and a little more uncomfortable when, our health deteriorates or anything like that.
It does. And not only that, but cognitive decline can
Mm,
begin. And often, one of the things I learned from researching the book is the part of our brain that is often impacted by cognitive changes is the part that also impacts our self-awareness. So when we've looked at our elders and thought, Mom, why can't you remember
right.
that? Or like, why are you asking me that again? Or, what's going on? Well, they really aren't aware. And so that kind of was a wake up call to me. It's not that they, it's not like someone doesn't care. They just don't realize that they're behaving differently.
Mm,
And so when it comes to finances, of course, that's scary. But also when it comes to expressing your wishes, my friend Denise Kay, again, she refers to this phase as we are, adults. We have all of our adult rights, but we reverted to about sixth grade decision making ability.
mm,
And so she said that's just what happens with the brain in most people around age 80. Now, not for everyone, but in most people, that's when it begins. And so, wow, if you wait that long to think about some of these things and make those decisions, it can be too late. You may not be clear yourself. I had a lady I met with years ago who did wait too long. She was in her 80s. Her husband had passed about 20 years prior. He had been 20 years older than her. And she had lived in the same house and, was down to a couple $100,000 in savings. And she needed to move to be closer to family, but she just was at that point where she couldn't even make the decisions that needed to be made
mm.
to, get a mover or to figure out help, or she just, we could go through the finances, but when it came to making the decisions, she couldn't do it anymore. And so it was really this wake up call of realizing if we wait too long, we get kind of stuck. We're not able to think as clearly about trade-offs, and so we need to think through these things earlier.
Yeah, yeah, great points. Okay, so we'll round it out here with what we're kind of getting at is the no-go years. So again from the book, none of us know exactly what our final phase will look like. While most of us hope for a quick exit, changes often unfold slowly. Some may need care for months, others for many years. And, this is such a it's always uncomfortable it's like the elephant in the room. You don't want to talk about it. We don't want to think about it. We don't want to plan for it. We just hope for the best. But it's reality, and you have to face that. Everybody is Father Time's undefeated. Everybody's going to go through their no-go phase, and some may drag on. Some might be quick. But yeah, hopefully it's planned for. Anything you want to add to the no-go years?
Yeah, I mean, on the bright side, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
we don't know what's coming. On the bright side, the percentage of households that incur really large long-term care costs is actually pretty small. So I've seen some stats by T. Rowe Price has a study out, and it shows, about 15% of households will have costs exceeding 250,000. Think about, if you were to have dementia or Alzheimer's and you're physically very healthy, but you need to be in a place that has memory care services, you could be there for 10 years, a long time and very expensive care. And so those are the things that we worry about. My thought on that is, well, you know what? I don't care if I spend my assets down. I'll go on Medicaid, because I
Right,
won't know the difference. Now,
right,
maybe
right.
that's not the right attitude, but sometimes I do think about it that way. But you can also plan with long-term care policies. You can plan your savings. What we like to do is often use home equity as in that situation, you're no longer in the home. So we are going to transition that home equity into covering these care costs. So you do need to have a plan in place. But the other 85% of people, the costs they incur are usually manageable. So we have all of your income coming in still, Social Security and your required minimum distributions. And now when you need care, that income is simply being repurposed toward a lot of the healthcare costs. And even before, something I forgot to mention in slow go is you will see expenses transition to maybe having a house cleaner or more help
Mhm.
doing some of the lawn maintenance, things around the house you used to do, but you're going to just need more help doing them. And so for many people, the expenses just transition from one bucket of travel and more entertaining and more transportation to a different bucket of more help around the house that I'm going to need. And they aren't huge catastrophic expenses.
Yeah, and for the listeners, we're kind of going really quickly over it. We only have so much time here, but in the book, you do a great job of going through each of these phases and kind of identifying some of the tax planning opportunities, some of the investment decisions, some other things. Like there's a lot of good, even in the no-go years, there's still some tax planning considerations that can be addressed. It's not like things just stop here, and I think that's great about the
Yeah,
book.
it's such a great point because I get so excited about the emotional transitions. Then you're right, the book covers a lot of more practical tax planning and
Yeah.
investment things. And one of the things to consider in those later phases is what I mentioned in the book, that step up in cost basis.
Mhm.
And so depending on whether you're in a community property state or non-community property state, you can structure things in a way, particularly if you're married, where your spouse could get a step up in cost basis, or you may have assets and there can be this tendency to want to add children to the title. That may not be such a wise move. And so you need to be aware of some of those tax and planning opportunities that shift, that are different in the slow and no-go phases than are the types of opportunities we look at earlier on.
Gotcha. Okay, so I want to ask you this, and we probably already touched on it, and we don't need to go back into it if we have, but I'll put you on the spot. So, in your experience here, you've talked to a lot of people approaching retirement, into retirement. Can you give me a couple things that people worry too much about, and then maybe people don't worry enough about?
People worry too much about running out of money.
Mhm. Yeah,
There's no question.
yeah.
Um, having been through the great financial recession with clients who had just retired in 2006 and 2007, no doubt it was scary. But everybody made it through just fine and they're still comfortably retired. And so understanding and having a plan for that type of volatility is necessary. but knowing you're going to adapt and adjust, and if you've done your planning consistently, you're not going to just run out of money one day. Like it just,
Hmm.
it doesn't work that way. So I would say that's what people maybe worry about too much, not enough. Really, probably this transition into slow go and then particularly into no go. I see people getting involved or getting their family involved maybe too late. So I had a client, they're in their 90s, early 90s now, sent them the book, and they sent me an email and said, I read your book, I heard you, let's set a meeting with our daughter. And for 5 years, we've been saying, let's set a family meeting. We like to involve at a certain pace, one of the adult children, if you have a good, healthy family structure. And this was their executor and successor trustee. And so for the first time, we were able to set up a family meeting, get the paperwork in place so that she has authority over the accounts now. It doesn't take any authority away from them, but you can add a co-trustee at a certain point so that they can make decisions right alongside you. And those are the things I think people fear losing their independence. But actually asking for help and realizing this is a natural part of that phase, we're going to need help, and getting those things in place sooner. That's the thing I think people don't think about enough.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. That's great. Well, Dana, our guest today is Dana Anspach. Her book is Living Off Your Acorns. It's a great book. Go out there and get it. Dana, thank you for taking the time. I enjoyed talking to you. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Jason, it's been wonderful to meet you, and thank you so much.
The opinions and statements presented on this show are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations. Never make any investment or financial decisions based on information offered on this show without first consulting your financial, legal, or tax advisor. All economic and performance information mentioned on the show is historical in nature and is not indicative of any future results. All indices mentioned on this show are unmanaged and cannot be invested in directly. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy. Lastly, all opinions expressed by Jason Katita and any guests on the show are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of or are endorsed by Toba Financial. For Jason Katita, investment advisory services are offered through Toba Financial LLC, a registered investment advisor offering advisory services in the state of Hawaii and in other jurisdictions where exempt from registration.